أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه والتابعين بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. We start in the name of Allah, the most gracious, most merciful. We bear witness there is no deity worthy worship except Allah, praise and glory be to Him, and that Muhammad is the seal of messengers. He was sent as a mercy to all mankind. May peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, his family, his companions, and those who follow this path until the day of judgment. I greet you with greeting of Islam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you all, dear brothers, dear sisters, dear viewers. This is the A2Z show, and with your host, Dr. Abdul Aziz, and our guest, Asad Zaman. And inshallah, you are well. I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, everyone is in good health and good iman and good wealth as well in this very difficult situation as well. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant recovery. Those people have been infected or they are ill as well, and those who have passed away, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shower their mercy upon them and give them the highest for those in paradise as well, and give their families and friends patience and great reward. Ameen. It's nice to meet you again, Brother Asad Zaman. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Good to be with you again. We missed it last week, so we got plenty to catch up on.
Inshallah, I think that Manchester was very busy, I think, with all protests and all this, what happened in Gaza and the popular uprising, I think was a global uprising, I think. And of course, we might, I think, go upon it about the BBC Media City protest as well in last week as well. And of course, we can talk about it as well. Now, I think we missed that Friday prayer, and you were actually in the Muslim Youth Foundation, and you gave a very, very, of course, in Friday, its time is very short, but you gave a brief history about the history of Palestine and Zionism and Israel creation and formation. And you have managed, I think, to give an idea about what is going on. Can we just go over that, first of all, on this Friday pulpit, please?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's very relevant. It would have been more appropriate last week. Unfortunately, we couldn't do it because obviously things were still fresh. But of course, we know, Abdul Aziz, you and me, that this is going to happen again. And the world knows that until there is a just settlement of this issue, this bombardment and suffering of the Palestinians will continue. So every 3-4 years, there's going to be this suffering. Of course, suffering is on a daily basis, but the intensive bombardment, like we've just experienced, this is going to happen every 3-4 years. Anyhow, so the question that I suppose really many people might be asking, or probably should be asking, is how did we get into this mess? How did we lose the third holiest place in Islam, to non-Muslims? Well, 638 AD or CE, the Christian era, just a few years really after the Prophet ﷺ departed, Umar Farooq radiallahu anhu, during his Khilafah, conquered Jerusalem and told the inhabitants, the Jews, Christians, and anybody else, look, everything of yours is safe. We're not going to take anything. Your place of worship will be respected. Your businesses, your homes, your families, your wives, children, everyone is going to be respected and protected. So you just can continue your life as you were before. And perhaps, in fact, in more security and protection than perhaps before. And those who wanted to leave were free to leave with all their possessions and everything. Anyhow, there was peace between Muslim, Christian, and Jew for centuries after this, until the Crusaders decided they wanted to take Jerusalem from the Muslims. And so there were 3 crusades, and in one of them, Jerusalem was taken from Muslims. And in fact, they came, they slaughtered the Crusaders, the Christian Crusaders slaughtered Muslims and Jews, as they put it in one narration. They slaughtered and slaughtered until they were knee deep in their blood. That is how much slaughter that took place. Tens, hundreds of thousands. Anyhow, they took over, and they hated the Jews so much they banned them from Jerusalem. Anyhow, that for about 80, 90 years, the Crusaders ruled Jerusalem. Then along comes Salahuddin Ayyubi, rahmatullah alayhi, the great Kurdish commander, and he liberated Jerusalem from the Crusaders. And interestingly, he allowed the Jews back to Jerusalem. The Christians had banned them, and the Muslims had brought them back, allowed them back. Again, for centuries after this, pretty much there was peace. And then if we fast forward to around the 18th century, 17th, 18th, 19th century, there was persecution of Jews by Christians in Europe. The reality is that the Christians have never forgiven the Jews, as they put it, for killing their God. Christians regard Isa alayhi salam, Jesus, as Allah, and also as Son of God as well. And so they have never forgiven them. In the Bible, the Jews are guilty of murder. In the Quran, they are guilty of attempted murder, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that وَمَا قَتَلُوا وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ وَرَفَعَ عَلَيْهِ. And he was, Isa Islam was neither killed nor crucified, but they thought he had been, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says he raised him up alive, so he didn't die, but the Christians believe he died, and the Jews are responsible for it. And so to this day, they have never forgiven the Jews for that. And certainly we find that persecution of Jews in Europe under Christianity started to increase, no question about it. And then they started to, especially in the sort of 20th century, or maybe 19th century, around the mid 1800s, there was talk amongst the Jewish elites and academics, and these were mostly atheist, secular Jews, that we need our own homeland where we can be safe from Christian persecution. A piece of land somewhere on the planet that we can call home, and we can be safe from these Christians who will never leave us alone. Interestingly, at the same time, there was greater Christian awakening amongst the Protestants, who are the majority, of course, in Britain and America. Catholics are the majority in most other countries. And so when they started reading the Bible more literally, they came to a conclusion that the end times are not far, the A2Z Zaman, as we say, and we need to prepare for the coming of Christ, of Isa alayhi salam. Of course, Muslims also believe that near the end times, A2Z Zaman, Jesus Christ, Isa alayhi salam, will return and rule from Jerusalem. So the Christians also believe this, and they felt they had to make plans, okay, make the preparations for the return of Christ. Almost like to create the circumstances and then force Allah to send Isa alayhi salam, na'udhu billah. That is essentially how their thinking went. So you have these fanatical extremist Christians who want to bring about the conditions for the return of Christ. What were those conditions? What did they have to fulfill? Well, number one, Israel must exist. Of course, at that time, there was no Israel, there was Palestine. Number two, Jerusalem must be the capital of Israel. Number three, all Jews must go to Israel. From around the world, all of them. And nowadays, today, we are told there's about 16 million. Perhaps there might be more, but that is the official figure. Next, that that Al-Aqsa Mosque must be destroyed, and Solomon's temple must be, the temple of Sulaiman al-Islam, must be built where the Al-Aqsa compound is right now. So to destroy the Dome of the Rock and Masjid al-Aqsa. And their belief is that once this happens, Jesus Christ, Isa al-Islam, will return and will rule the world from the temple, from Jerusalem. But they also believe that anyone who's there, and especially, of course, the Jews will be predominantly there. Any Jew who does not convert to Christianity, does not believe Jesus is his Lord, will be executed. So they are actually planning a massive Holocaust of the Jews, because how many Jews are going to convert to Christianity? Well, according to one talk that I've listened to by the famous Noam Chomsky, who himself, of course, is a left-wing Jew, he said that the Christian Zionists, and these are the fanatical Christians we're talking about, the Christian Zionists, they believe that 160,000 Jews will convert to Christianity. The rest won't. So, we were talking about 16 million today that exist. So we're talking about a Holocaust of about 16 million Jews that the Christian Zionists had been planning before Hitler was born. And of course, Hitler, we are told, killed 6 million of them. So they are planning a mega Holocaust of the Jews once Jesus Christ returns. So this is the belief of the Christian Zionists. And so they started talking about creating Israel. As I said, that was the first thing, to create Israel. So at that time, and of course, in their minds, this was going to be in Palestine. Now, interestingly, when the the very secular atheist Jews, they started talking about a state of Israel, they didn't care where it was, and they didn't believe in the Bible or God or anything. They were secular, liberal, atheist Jews, like most of the founders were. So in 1897, Theodor Herzl, who was the main person, who was an Austrian Jew, secular, liberal, he was a journalist, he decided to come up with a blueprint for the state of Israel. How are we going to create it? And he, in fact, had shortlisted about 7, 8 countries or regions in the world where the state of Israel would take place. And in fact, I don't think Palestine was even one of those choices. It was only after 1897, in 1905, that Palestine was added to the list. So in 1897, in Basel, Switzerland, the World Zionist Organization held their meeting, and that's where it was agreed by all the top intellectual Jews, as well as the industrialists, the very rich Jews, that we have a 50-year project to create a state of Israel somewhere in the world. So they started doing their feasibility studies. the place that they wanted had to be under colonial rule. And of course, this is now colonial powers everywhere. Okay, Britain had its colonial rule, France, Holland, and the Russians and the Germans, and they all had their colonial enterprises all over, Africa and South America, the subcontinent, etc. And so they came to the conclusion that, well, they approached the colonial powers and said to them, we actually, what they realized was that because the Jews, certainly in Europe, were well-established Jews, they were not the ordinary citizens, they were the middle and upper classes. So Germany, they were actually more German than the Germans. They were totally secular, but super rich. They were the upper class Germans. So very well established. And so Theodor Herzl thought, these Jews in Europe, and in particular, are so well established. Why would they? Well, once it was decided in 1905 that Palestine was going to be the place that they wanted, because they realized that after speaking to all the colonial powers, none of them wanted to know about the creation of this Jewish state, because they knew that they would have to kick out the natives in order to create a Jewish state, and they were not happy. They weren't happy with the Jewish population already, and they thought we're going to create a problem for somebody else. But Britain said yes. And actually, at that time, the Ottoman Empire ruled over Palestine. And after negotiations between the secular Jews who wanted the state of Israel and the religious Christians who wanted the state of Israel, they decided Palestine was the best, they had the best opportunity. Britain was on their side, and Palestine, once the Ottoman Empire got destroyed after World War I, then Britain controlled it, and therefore Britain had, it had a mandate. Mandate is not ownership, it is essentially a permission to administer. But this was and who gave Britain this authority? The League of Nations. League of Nations came before the United Nations. So there was, at that time, there was no United Nations, you had a League of Nations. And because Britain and France were fighting over Palestine, they'd already decided about the rest of the Middle East through the Sykes-Picot Agreement, but both of them wanted Palestine. And so the League of Nations said to Britain, you can administer Palestine on condition that you find local Palestinians, you train them up to run Palestine. That was what the mandate was about. That is the mandate. But of course, Britain had different ideas. Again, we won't go into the details as to exactly why Britain did this. It had their own reasons. Something to do with Chaim Weizmann being a chemist, and he'd come up with TNT and explosives and various other things as well. And Britain sort of owed him one, but also Britain wanted Palestine to become Israel because of the Christian Zionists. Anyhow, Britain decided to promise the secular Jews.
That's the Balfour Declaration, 1917.
November 1917, Britain decided to promise the Jews Palestine. Interestingly, this Balfour Declaration, one very prominent Jew called Arthur Koestler, he described it as one nation promising a second nation the country of a third nation. Britain promised the Jews the country of the Palestinians. So what he's basically saying is that Britain had no right, no authority to promise Palestine to the Jews, because Palestine belonged to the Palestinians, not to Britain. And so essentially what he was saying was Britain could promise London to the Jews. Britain could promise Manchester to the Jews, Scotland, Wales to the Jews, but Britain could not promise Palestine to the Jews. That paper, the Balfour Declaration, in reality, by law, is not worth the paper it's written on. That's the reality. Anyhow, Britain had the power. Ottoman Empire had collapsed. Muslims were in a disarray. The colonialism was everywhere. Muslim lands had been colonized. Yeah, and then the Arab countries, unfortunately, didn't help. They didn't help. In fact, the Arab leaders were promised by Britain, help us to demolish the Ottoman Empire that controlled Palestine at the time, and we will give you independence. And those rather foolish Arab leaders, they actually believed the British. And therefore, Britain said to them, help us get rid of it. And so the Arab leaders helped Britain to destroy the Ottoman Empire. But of course, once the Ottoman Empire got destroyed, rather than give the Arabs their independence, which is what they promised, Ottoman rule was replaced by British and French rule. That's basically what happened. So Britain then in 1917 promises Palestine to the Jews in this, and then essentially what happens is, as there is more persecution of Jews in Europe, then Britain opens the doors of Palestine to Jewish immigration, because that was a plan anyway. That was a whole plan to turn Palestine into a Jewish state. And in fact, the fact that Britain appointed the main representative of Britain in Palestine as a Jewish Zionist called Herbert Samuel, it was very clear what Britain had in mind: to allow the maximum number of Jews. Initially, there were only a tiny number, maybe a few percent, but they allowed so much Jewish immigration into Palestine that over 1/3 of Palestine became Jewish. And then, of course, there were riots. The Palestinians, Arabs there were saying, what the hell's going on here? Our land is being taken over. And of course, how did the Jewish leaders encourage Jews who are very well established in Europe and America to come over? Well, they said to them, look, this Palestine is a land without a people, and you Jews are a people without a land. And you can see all the persecution going on, and these Christians are never going to accept you. And there is evidence, according to stuff that I've read, that people like Theodor Herzl were going around European capitals, telling the colonial powers that, look, we Jews, we are an absolute pain. We will cause you trouble. And you know all the trouble that we cause. Why don't you kick all the Jews out and send them to Palestine? They were literally trying to whip up anti-Semitism. So the Jews would feel uncomfortable in Europe. And then there we are, there's Palestine, this new land of the Jews waiting for you to accept you. So they did every dirty trick in the book to try and get these well-established, very rich Jews to go into this, what basically to them was a desert. Of course, it was, the Palestinian people loved their land. And when the first Jews arrived, and they realized they'd been lied to. There was already a people there, and it wasn't a desert. As the Zionist leaders themselves said, there's hardly a single field in the whole of Palestine that's not been cultivated. And in fact, the Palestinians loved their land so much that, and they used they were so productive that a citrus fruit, oranges, for example, when the quotas were done for the whole of the world as to citrus production, who do you think was the #1 producer of oranges in the entire world? We know about Spanish oranges. We know how productive America is, and all the oranges and stuff which are produced in the world. It was Palestine that came #1. This tiny piece of land, the size of Wales, with about 1 million or so people in there, that produced the highest number of oranges in the entire world. This was a report in 1934, before the Jews took over. And the second, producing less than half of what the Palestinians were producing, was the United States of America. That tells you how much they loved their land and how much they used it. And it most certainly wasn't a land without a people, as the Jewish Zionist propaganda said at the time. So essentially, also, so what happens? So 20s and 30s go, and then of course Hitler comes to power in Germany, and we know what his attitude towards the Jews was not positive. And so as Hitler comes to power, then the persecution of the Jews starts. The Jewish the Zionist leaders, and Zionism was a new movement, remember, at this time. It would be like ISIS, for example, right now. Yeah, ISIS taking over a piece of a land and stuff, or being promised a piece of land, and then encouraging all Muslims to go to that land. So this is, the Zionists, they did exactly the same. They actually spoke to Eichmann, Hitler's right-hand man, Adolf Eichmann, and said to him, look, we know what you're doing to the Jews. And the last thing you want right now is a Jewish uprising in Germany. And at that time, there were probably at least 500,000 Jews. The last thing you want now, because Hitler had really made a massive mistake from a strategic point of view. He'd attacked Russia, and Russia is a massive country. And he underestimated the Russian winter. And so, although he sent his troops and armor, I think in the summer, but before they reached Moscow, the Russian winter came, and they were stuck, and the temperature drops to like -50, and the snow and the treacherous conditions. Their tanks got stuck. The soldiers, the supply lines were in a mess, and their soldiers were dying in huge numbers. And Hitler had sent most of the troops towards the Russian front, which meant there were very few left actually in Germany. And so the Zionist leaders told Adolf Eichmann, we know the mass slaughter you're planning for the Jews and the persecution that's going on. The final solution: if we inform the Jews, the Jewish populations, the ordinary Jews, of what's going on, there will be an uprising, and you won't be able to handle it because you don't have enough soldiers here. So we'll make a deal. And the deal is this: we will keep quiet about the mass slaughter of Jews that you're doing, on condition that you allow the educated Jews and the very rich Jews and the Zionist leaders in Germany and the other areas that Germany controlled to go to Israel. And so we can create our Jewish state there. Adolf Eichmann spoke to Hitler and he agreed. He said, okay, I agree. Because Hitler wanted the Jews out anyway. So whether he was going to kill them in the gas chambers or whether he's going to expel them, they were out. They weren't going to be a problem for him. So he agreed to it. And so there was a mass emigration of Jews from Germany, all the intellectuals, the rich, industrialists, and the Zionist leaders. And all of them were allowed to go to Israel through the Jewish Agency, which had just been set up by, I think he's probably still alive, Abba Eban, or Abba Eban. So so there's mass numbers going into Palestine. And of course, there were the Arabs, the Palestinians were not happy about this, but there was nothing they could do. They could protest, they could strike, but the power was with the British. They're the ones who were ruling. And so as more and more of these Zionists and others, they moved in, they started planning for their state of Israel. And with them, of course, 4 main Zionist terrorist organizations were formed: the Haganah, the Irgun, the Sterngang, also known as the Lumi, and the Palmach. These were internationally recognized terrorist groups. Just like today, ISIS is regarded as a terrorist group, and even Hamas. So these were internationally recognized, not just by the British, by others as well. And a huge amount of arms they received from the West, because they agreed to, obviously, this idea of kicking all the Jews out. Europe didn't like the Jews anyway. So kick all the Jews out and put them into Palestine and let them have their own state, which essentially would be like a satellite for the British, an outpost of European civilization, because they could see that all these Jewish leaders were secular, atheists. They didn't want to know about Judaism or the Bible or whatever. And of course, the Zionist Christians were very happy because, their plan is coming to light as well, because they wanted to create a state of Israel to prepare for the second coming of Christ. And essentially, these terrorist groups started terrorizing the populations. And so those Palestinian populations that were near the Syrian border, they were pushed into refugee camps in Syria. Those who were towards the Jordanian border were pushed into, forced literally by terrorism, into refugee camps in Syria or in Jordan. Mm. And those who were closer to the Egyptian border were forced out of Israel into what Gaza was meant to be a refugee camp for them anyway. And so the whole place became one refugee camp for those Palestinians who were living in what is now today Ashkelon and these other border towns close to Gaza. So ironically, when Hamas sends its rockets, it's actually sending them mostly to those areas where they were kicked out, where the Palestinians were kicked out of, who are living in Gaza. Okay, this is their old villages. In total, around 800,000 Palestinians were forced out by the use of terrorism from 700 villages. Yeah, 800,000 Palestinians from 700 villages. So Israel was, and of course, those same leaders of these terrorist groups, who were there? There were people like Ariel Sharon was, I think, the military head of the Haganah, and the Haganah later on became the IDF. Okay, the Israeli Defense Force, which is the Israeli military right now. The head of the Stern Gang and the head of the Ergun were Yitzhak Shamir and Menachem Begin. And what happened to these people? They became the future leaders of Israel. So it is absolutely accurate to say Israel was created by terrorists, by the use of terrorism, and it has been run by terrorists ever since its creation. That is an absolutely accurate statement. No emotion involved in that at all, because I've just stated the facts to you, which are all documented. And so, the role of the Arab leaders around Jordan and Syria and stuff was really quite despicable. In those early days, if they wanted to, they could have crushed the Zionist slaughter that was going on with the Palestinians, and slaughters like Deir Yassin was one of the famous slaughters. A couple 200, 300 people were, men, women, and children were all slaughtered in Deir Yassin. But there were many other slaughters like that, massacres. Why did the Arab leaders not wholeheartedly fight? I mean, there was supposed to be some wars. They sent their soldiers in. But I've listened to the testimonies of those soldiers on, I think, Al Jazeera and other programs. And they said, we could, if we went there, we could easily have crushed them. But our leaders pulled us back. They actually pulled us back. And it was shocking to listen to those testimonies by the soldiers. And we really wanted to kill these Zionists who were slaughtering the Palestinians and forcing them out. But we were given orders not to go forward and attack them. So, that's another episode in its own right as to why the Arab leaders did, basically, why did they literally allow the creation of Israel when they could have destroyed the Zionist movement right at the outset. There were enough of them. They were surrounding them. Egypt, Jordan, Syria. They could have totally crushed them. They had the manpower. They had the tanks and planes and all the rest of it. Anyhow, so then 1948 comes, and huge. And interestingly, because the British were there, these terrorist groups, they were targeting, especially like Ergun. They were specialists in two main things: attacking British troops, killing British soldiers, and secondly, they used to plant bombs on buses that they knew would be used by Arab mothers taking their children to school. Yes, this is all documented, okay? And there've been documentaries, and what I'm saying to you is information from there. And so this is pure terrorism. And of course, we know about the King David Hotel. Almost 100 British administrators of Palestine were blown up by Menachem Begin. And once that happened, the British said, okay, it's time to leave, after they created the mess in the first place. And of course, many of their soldiers were being killed by the Israeli or the Zionist terrorist groups. So 1948 comes, the British leave, and the Zionists declare their state under Ben Gurion, that this is the Jewish state. Interestingly, what happened, and this is a lesson for us to learn, is how did then, I mean, it was still obviously a very primitive, area, land. All the educated Jews from around the world, whether they were educated in specialists in education, in the military, in science, in agriculture, all the top specialists who were working in Europe and America, they went to Israel and created modern institutions, bringing the very latest knowledge and equipment and everything and expertise that was available. And that's why today Israel is a very, very modern state, because they had it all planned out, you see, with right from the outset. So today Israel is a very modern state and a world leader in electronics and in cyber technology, cyber security, etc. And of course, weapons manufacture as well. It's because, and of course, all the major tech companies are now established in Israel. So some wars occur, 1967 war occurs, and it's a 6-day war. In 6 days, first of all, the Zionists had a small amount of territory, and then they expanded it. In 6 days, they managed to defeat all the Arab armies. But there's I've read about the 6-day war, and many of the American Jews and French and British Jews, because they wanted their new state to survive, they volunteered to fight for Israel. And British planes and American planes and others, from my understanding, you could say allegedly, they were painted with Israeli colors, and they fought on behalf of Israel against the Arabs. And so you could see within all the whatever satellite technology they had at the time, I think it was still fairly primitive, but they had intelligence and stuff, was given to the Israelis because this was a European project. So they made sure that their new baby was going to survive. So, and to this day, the West, and especially the Christian Zionists, in combination with the Jewish Zionists, and now we've got Muslim Zionists in the form of some of our Arab leaders, they will make sure that Israel survives. That's why every American president has been a Christian Zionist. They are preparing for the second coming of Christ. And Christian Zionists are very, very powerful in America. Okay, they're all the TV evangelists, who are extremely influential and powerful, they're all Christian Zionists. All conservative Christians are Christian Zionists. Southern Baptists are Christian Zionists. So you've got about 40, 50 million at least, minimum, in America who are Christian Zionists. And their aim is to, as I said to you, all Jews must go to Israel. So they actually fund Jews who are not very rich, they fund them to go to Israel. Even right now, today, there are Christian Zionist churches who are very rich, extremely rich, and they fund Jews. Number one, they find them jobs there, homes, land, whatever. And of course, the Israeli state is very keen to.
For the sponsor settlements and all these kind of things.
Absolutely, absolutely. They sponsor them. Why? Because for the preparation for the second coming of Christ, when they will basically have a mass slaughter of these Jews when they refuse to become Christians. So that is what's happening, has been happening till now. And of course, Israel, where has Israel got these billions for these very modern settlements? Almost 4 billion, it used to be 3 billion, now it's about 4 billion every single year, no strings attached, from America. American taxpayers have been paying. Why? Has the American government been giving them 3 to 4 billion now every year? The influence of Christian Zionists. It is mostly the Christian Zionists in America that are supporting Israel more than even the Jewish Zionists. because Jews are supposed to be about 6 million, and 6 million, 7 million, whatever. I've been hearing this number for 30, 40 years that there's only 6 million Jews. I think there's more than that. New York is basically Jewish. And if you go to New York, this is well known over there. That and that is the heart of the financial heart of America, New York. Washington, D.C. is the actual capital, but the financial capital of America is New York. And that is pretty much, in their hands. So the situation till now has been essentially suppress the Palestinians. We've got this land, we're staying. We've kicked them out of their homes. They will want their homes back. Yes, and there will always be a problem for us. But we've got the upper hand. We've got America on our sides. We've got Europe on our sides. And therefore, we are safe. But of course, they're not safe. And as we've seen, especially recently with the Gaza attack, that they've been the rockets of Hamas have been becoming more and more sophisticated. Till now, it was just literally lead pipes with a bit of gunpowder, and those lead pipes, by the time they reached even a couple of kilometers, the closest settlements in Ashdod and Ashkelon and whatever you, and is it one or two others border towns, which are literally just about a mile or a few kilometers. By the time they reached them, the gunpowder was gone, and all that landed was a lead pipe on them. And you would only you would only die if it literally landed on you. If it landed 1 meter away, it wouldn't do anything because there's nothing in there. Because that's all they were, lead pipes with a bit of gunpowder. But of course, that created some degree of fear. But now, remember we had this conversation about the British warship that sunk off Gaza in First World War, and they managed to salvage all those bombs, probably hundreds and hundreds of bombs, and then they customized them using the lead pipes from the Jewish settlements that they'd abandoned
in Gaza.
Yeah, in Gaza, and all the the water pipes and everything else, and gas pipes, and they managed to put them together. You can see what's been happening. Their missiles have now been hitting Tel Aviv. They've been hitting northern Tel Aviv, further away, and that has really rocked the Jewish or Zionist establishment enormously. Like, where these guys are getting more sophisticated. We thought in Tel Aviv we were safe because they didn't have the technology to send the rockets as far as Tel Aviv. But now they have been landing in Tel Aviv, and they're much more accurate and more powerful. Probably because of that, and obviously they've been smuggling stuff in, and there are people who will help them. So what Hamas, I read this article a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, when one Hamas member was asked, why are you bothering to send these lead pipes with a bit of gunpowder and they don't do anything? He said, for one reason, we know they don't do much damage. And only if they land on you, they can actually do you any damage. You probably injure you more than kill you. Maybe they'll kill you. But he said the reason is we are creating a balance of fear. A balance of fear. They terrorize our populations, our women and children in particular, regularly sending these bombs over and missiles, and deliberately breaking the sound barrier very, very low, just above their flats and houses. And of course, you hear the boom. Imagine just over your head, you hear the sonic boom. They deliberately, in their F-16s and stuff, they do the sonic boom just over their heads on a regular basis to frighten the women and children, to traumatize them. And of course, they are traumatized. And so what we are doing with these lead pipes with gunpowder, they want to call rockets, is to bring about a level of fear. You are going to terrorize our population, we will terrorize your population. Because even though they're just lead pipes, the point is they know if they come near, it could land on them. Could land on their house, and it could kill their children or themselves or whatever. So there's some level of fear is there. Anyhow, so what's been happening till now is basically just more oppression, but politically there's been something happening in Israel. And this is what is worrying, and it's a positive thing for the Palestinians. This has been worrying now for the Jews, for the Zionist rulers. On the one hand, you've got some serious internal conflicts going on. So within Israel, the Orthodox Jews, they were only about maybe 1 or 2% when Israel was started, and so they were just on the side. Yeah, they were not taken very seriously. The men were just interested in studying. They don't believe in work, but they do like to have large families. But they were never seen as a threat. I mean, not even 1 or 2% in the whole of the country. But what's been happening in terms of their population is that the secular Jews, who are the vast majority, who are mostly atheist, and by the way, there was a program about 20 years ago on I think either BBC or ITV that 25% of all Jews in Israel eat pork. And that gives you an idea of how secular they are. 25% of Jews in Israel eat pork. Imagine that. So that gives you an idea of them. And now today would be even more, because I think this was before the Russian, the refuseniks were let in, who also were secular and atheist and what have you. So what's happening now, of course, is that the Orthodox Jews, their numbers are increasing because they believe in large families. 9, 10 kids is normal for them. The secular Jews, who are the majority, who just want to, their lives are like a typical European or American, just totally secular, anything goes. They don't believe in the Bible, they don't believe in the Sabbath, they don't believe in any dietary issues or whatever, yeah? But they also have a Western mindset. They don't like kids. So maybe 1, maybe 2 kids. And so the result is that the Orthodox Jewish population, who don't want to be in the military, men don't want to work, and they don't believe in the state of Israel, because they firmly believe that when the Messiah comes, then he will take them to the promised land. And therefore, it is forbidden for them to enter the promised land, to enter Palestine. It is forbidden for them. So they don't even recognize the state of Israel. Now, their numbers have been really increasing, and today they're about 10% of the Israeli population. So on the one hand, they have large families. Secondly, they don't work, so they have to live off state benefits. They only believe in studying the Torah. That's it, all their life. That is their responsibility. And they do not believe, because they don't believe in the state, they don't acknowledge the state, they do not believe in fighting in the military.
Therefore, they don't go for the national service as well.
No military. No military. so that is a major headache now for the Israeli state, because they're against, and they're actually, many of them are pro-Palestinian, because they say, well, look, this is the state of Israel is against, it goes against our teachings. So how can we? So we have to be, basically pro-Palestinian. What's happening to them? And of course, these are religious Jews. They say, look, justice and living in peace is part of our faith. And one of the 10 commandments is thou shalt not kill. And we're killing these innocent men, women, and children. So it goes completely against our religion, what the state of Israel is doing. And so they are openly, actually, many of them, pro-Palestinian for that reason. So that's the internally what's been happening. In terms of the outside world, something very interesting has been happening. Ever since social media, in particular, and satellite as well, and Al Jazeera and what have you, since they have taken off, until social media took off, and Al Jazeera took off in, I don't know, 2000, whatever it was, where were we hearing the news about Israel? From the Western media, from the BBC, from CNN, etc. Yeah? And they have always given a pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist, anti-Palestinian narrative. These poor little people surrounded by these horrible Arabs who are trying to kill them. Look, those 6 million died in the Holocaust, and now these nasty, horrible Arabs and Palestinians want to kill them here. We must support them, and etc. etc. Yeah, that's been the narrative. So the majority of people have always had a pro-Israeli attitude, and have been supporting, and they didn't mind their countries, their leadership supporting Israel. But with social media, the reality has now come into the open, and the myth that they had created, the Western media, has been shattered. Now people can see apartheid Israel in action, the reality of what is actually happening in Israel with regards to the treatment of the Palestinians. That reality is doing something amazing. It's been happening. It's not just now. It's been slowly building up over the last maybe 10, 15 years as social media has been taking off. And the main support for Israel has been from American Jews. But especially the young American Jews, they've been looking at what's been happening to the Palestinians. In reality, they've been looking at the brutality of the Israeli police and the military against men, women, and children. They're forcing them out of their homes and allowing settlers to go in, and all these very unfair laws, the law of return. A Jew has never never set foot in Palestine, in Israel, can have a land and house and permanent residency and can go anywhere, whereas a Palestinian whose grandparents and great grandparents have been from that land cannot go back and live where they were kicked out from. And so these injustices are now open for people to see on their mobiles through the social media. And more young people are turning away from the mainstream media. They're not interested in what the mainstream media has to say. They're interested in what's coming on their mobiles. It's much easier as well. And they can see the images. Images can't lie. As I say, a picture speaks 1,000 words. And what about videos? A million words. So the attitude of Jews outside, especially in America, is now changing. Even like just today, I was reading that the Christian Zionists, the youth amongst the Christian Zionists, they are changing their attitude as well. They're seeing the injustice and saying, no, not in our name. This is not what we believe in. This is brutality. This is not what we accept. And so they're turning away also from supporting Israel. And so you have this huge number of Jews now moving away from supporting Israel. And what's also happening is, perhaps partly because of social media as well, you have more and more Jews who love their state. They are pro-Israeli, but they realize, like Gerald Kaufman, the famous British MP, who died recently, that Israeli politics has now moved completely to the right. The left, who at least would speak the language of peace, they didn't do anything peaceful, but they spoke the language of peace. They are now dead. And the right wing, they are now in control. So you've got the right wing, the far right, that's where the direction that the Jews in Israel are going. The right and the far right. The left is dead. And that means, and what is their belief? No way to any Palestinian state. Forget this two-state solution stuff that they've been pushing, Resolution 262. They don't believe in any of that. Okay? And because they don't believe in that, the right wing, the Jews outside, who are majority, of course, are secular Jews. They are saying very clearly, we cannot support this state anymore because these governments, these right-wing governments, Netanyahu and all these others, they are going to destroy this beautiful dream that we had. And the result will be that there will be no more Israel, because unless the Palestinian lives in peace, there'll be no peace and security for the Jew. They know this. They realize this. And that can only happen, they acknowledge this now, that can only happen if the Jew and the Palestinian are, well, there are two ways. One is you give the Palestinians their own state, which would have been the West Bank and Gaza, and give them total independence, let them run their state as they want, no blockades like they gave Gaza to the Palestinians, and then they blockaded it. So everything that goes in and out is all controlled. And every single person living in Gaza, the Israelis have got their mobile numbers. They have to register with Israel. So there's no independence at all for them. Just because the settlers moved out and their troops, their soldiers moved out, doesn't mean they've got independence. They're being strangled on a daily basis since 2007. So because the right wing have no intention of giving an inch of their land, of the land of the West Bank and Gaza to as a Palestinian state. So the right wing realizes, and the world realizes, there's really only one way. There's only one solution. And this Naftali Bennett, who's now come in, he is, you see, Netanyahu was Hitler, but he was a very smart Hitler, in the sense that he wasn't as very, very openly sort of anti-Palestinian and anti this and anti that, right? He was careful with his language. His belief, of course, was that, but because he was well trained in America as a journalist or presenter or whatever, he was very well. He knew his media and stuff training. He tried to sound half human at least. This Mr. Naftali Bennett, he hates the Palestinians and he says he hates them very clearly. He doesn't believe in a two-state solution, and he openly states very clearly there's going to be no state for the Palestinians. So when people outside are going to listen to this guy, when his name came forward a few days ago, I thought this is the best thing that can happen to the Palestinians. You need someone, the outside needs to hear someone who really believes what Netanyahu and all these other right-wingers believe. There's going to be no state for the Palestinians. So the idea of a two-state solution can only come about through one mechanism. One, and that is if the Israeli government pulls out every single Israeli soldier from the West Bank. Then you'll find the settlers will disappear overnight. They will not live there one day without this massive Israeli troop present to protect those settlements. They just won't. They will not survive. They will not stay there for one day. But what is the chance of that happening? Zero. The Israeli government is never going to pull those soldiers out of the West Bank, and they will always protect those Israeli settlements. So you've got two options left. If there's going to be no two-state solution, then either there's going to be a one-state solution where West Bank, Gaza, Israel, the whole area, as the saying goes, from the river to the sea, there is no discrimination. One man, one vote. Palestinian or Jew. Everyone votes, one government. Okay? Now, of course, the Israelis will never allow that. That is the obvious solution. In other words, going back to pre-Zionism. They will not accept that because you have to put an end to Zionism, because Zionism is racism. It will always believe in the superiority of the Jew over the Palestinian. So they know that if they allow, for example, the Palestinians to return back to their homes, and they have one man, one vote, then there will be no Zionist state anymore, because the majority will be Palestinian. And the Palestinians will obviously have their own parties. Yeah? That will be the end of the Zionist dream, end of Zionism. And therefore,
and there when you said that the end is, therefore you are saying that this Zionist movement will not actually survive if there was no outside support of the United States?
Impossible. Impossible. It could only survive with outside support. And when I say outside, Christian Zionist support. If the Christian Zionists remove their support, Israel cannot survive. Also, of course, so I said there were two solutions. One is a one man, one vote. And everyone is treated equally, and they all live in peace and harmony, which is exactly what the Jews want. They want to live in peace and harmony. So Muslim, Christian, and Jew, or atheist
and the rest, yeah,
they live in peace and harmony. And they vote every 4 years for a government, and whoever the government is. Why would the Israelis have a problem with that? Why would they have a problem with it? I don't get it. The Jews wanted Israel to live in peace and harmony, which they will never get. And if they get rid of this Zionist ideology, they will get that peace and harmony. and
Therefore,
prosperity.
therefore, you are saying that alliances have to stand within Palestine and Israel to get this Zionism out of the way, isn't it?
Zionism is racism, and Zionism is what created the problem between the Jew, the Christian, and the Muslim. So only by Zionism disappearing will apartheid disappear from Israel. Because right now you have 100% apartheid system, as we had in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Okay.
so in the absence of this, there's only one solution. And that is what this Zionist government has implemented, which is apartheid, which is a
Right.
permanent state of apartheid, a permanent state of apartheid.
Right. The question, I think, because I think we dwelled a lot on this. Let's just, this, help and reconstruction of Gaza and this conditional, they put condition on to reconstruct Gaza for the one, the Islamic resistance movement, which part of it is Hamas and Islamic Jihad and all the things as well who are resisting the occupation, everything. Do you think, is it right that people want to put conditions on the Islamic resistance movement for reconstruction
What
of
sort of
Gaza?
conditions are they putting?
Mm.
What sort of conditions are they putting?
They put in that they said, I think the Israeli wants 3 conditions: give us our 4 prisoners, and any reconstruction towards reconstruction of Gaza should not be going to Hamas or Islamic resistance movement as well. The European are putting as well the condition that there should be an election in Palestine for credible leadership for Palestine state and everything. But at the end of the day, if you are going for humanitarian support and everything, why you put in this kind of conditions?
Okay, let's put this. Let's look at this one about the elections. Because thanks to the, and we know why Netanyahu did all this. It's because he was hoping, in terms of attacking Gaza and what have you, and the provocations of attacking Al-Aqsa. Because he is now losing power, and this guy will do anything to stay in power. And he thought by creating this war situation, then automatically all the Jews, all the Israelis will support me, and I will stay in power for another few years. Because Israeli politics is an absolute mess.
Yes.
We used to laugh at the Italians. Literally every 6 months, every year, they used to have an election.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember, yeah? Every couple of years, the government would just collapse and collapse.
It's like they had 5 elections with no overall majority anyway.
Right? This is what the Italians, we used to laugh at them. Now the Israelis are in exactly the same situation. Right? They're in exactly the same situation. It's just, and this new, by the way, this new coalition, you've got, this cannot last very long. It's going to be, it's a failure. You asked, whether Netanyahu, this is the end for Netanyahu. No, I don't think it's the end. He's a survivor. And he's going to be just standing on the side now, just watching these 3 parties. Who are these parties that have come into coalition? You've got Naftali, who hates the Arabs, who hates Muslims. Yeah? Far right, you could say, definitely far right. And then you've got the other coalition partner, who's extreme liberal, atheist, secular, probably on the left. And then you've got this Arab party,
Israeli, yes.
Arab Israeli party that actually, apart from what I've read, have got connections with the Muslim Brotherhood, Ikhwan. So how can you have a coalition of such completely, different views in one party? You're far right, you're extreme liberal, and then you got Muslim Brotherhood.
And the Orthodox Jews as well.
It's not going to work. It can't work.
Mm. Mm.
And so Netanyahu is just going to be standing on the side saying, okay, come on, guys, collapse so I can get back in again. So he hasn't disappeared, I don't think, unless he decides to retire for health reasons or whatever. But he's there. He'll be waiting on the side.
Right. Okay. And this ICC.
To answer your question about the conditions, let them implement this one condition of there being elections. Now, you and I both know and remember 2007 or 2006 when they had the election in Palestine. Hamas won hands down.
Yes.
Hamas won the overwhelming majority of the vote. I think it was a 67% or something. Today, because of the stupidity of Netanyahu, Hamas will probably get 99% of the vote. Because, I mean, what happened to Abbas and the PLO and the Palestinian Authority when all this destruction of Hamas was going on? When the expulsions of were happening in Sheikh Jarrah, when the attack on Al-Aqsa on the 27th of Ramadan was happening, what happened to the Palestinian Authority? Who came to the help of the Palestinians in Jerusalem? It was Hamas. So the Israelis have elevated Hamas to a higher level of popularity than they had before. Right. So if there are elections, free elections today, it's a no-brainer as to who's going to win. It's obvious who's going to win. So let there be elections.
Right. Okay.
But the problem is the West will never accept it if Hamas wins again.
All right. Okay. I think we will have to have a part 2 of that, I think, and we'll follow the news as it comes as well. And I think we'll go toward the news as well, and this G7 meeting and finance the big global businesses, 220 billion profit in COVID-19 condition, and a minimum of 15% corporate tax agreed. Do you think that was fair?
Well, look, in terms of tech businesses, if any of our listeners or viewers want to go into business, online business, tech business, that's where you got to go. Like in this COVID situation, what's happened? Amazon, 25% their profits went up. Zoom, again, what we are talking on now, their profits shot up. Netflix, their profits shot up. So the future is with tech. And this Naftali Bennett, he made about $150 million selling his tech company. He's into tech himself. So that technology, online businesses, that's where the future is. If you look at the top businesses today, what are they? Microsoft and Apple, these are all tech businesses. They've taken over all the traditional stuff. Who are the richest people in the world? It's not just property owners now. It's your Warren Buffetts and your Microsoft and your Zuckerberg, Facebook, etc. It's all tech. Yeah, and Apple, all tech. So yes, that's the direction to go. And yeah, so that's the advice that we have. I think we need to move on.
Right, okay. The other one, I think, as far as the human rights, I think the Tulsa massacre, first president of the United States speaking about it and going to the place in Oklahoma talking about it when white mobs went and killed and burnt businesses and homes of Black American almost in 1921, about 100 years ago. And when he spoke about that educating people what they should know and for the proper education of future generation, and people speak about if you don't know your past, you don't have any idea about your present, and you have no clue about the future. And never again is
learn from your past. That's right.
Yes, and therefore, do you think that recognizing this kind of, and in Canada as well, you know, about children in Catholic residency, discovered mass burial of children, all these kind of things. we have a problem with people reconciliating with their past, you know, like United States and.
Look, colonialism was about racism. We, the white races of the world, we, the Europeans, God has made us superior to Black people, and therefore we have some God-given right to go and take over their lands and rule their lands. And because their lives are worth so little, it's like stamping on ants or cockroaches. It's not a big deal killing them. And that's what the colonials did. This is what colonialism was all about, is this racist, white supremacist mentality. That's what Britain did in Africa, in India. And the French in Algeria, Morocco, the Italian, Libya and Somalia, and I mean, you know, the Dutch in South Africa.
Spanish as well.
Spanish in South America. The Portuguese in Brazil. I mean, this is what this is all about. It's about racism. It's about white supremacy, and using the Bible also to justify it as well. So, yes, now if they are going to be honest with themselves, they have a lot of apologizing to do. Now, this, you know, no one is going to say the white man is superior to the Black man, but that was the assumption behind colonialism and the justification for it. And the slave trade was all about white supremacist mentality. You know, we white people have a right to enslave Black people because they're inferior. So now today, that mentality has changed. It's no longer acceptable. So when they look back and see the crimes against humanity they committed against other people, the war crimes they committed, yes, there should be reparations. There should be an apology. There should be an acceptance and acknowledgement that what we did was wrong. And they need to compensate them. Absolutely. And there's a lot of wrong that was done by, you know, by the British and others to the Red Indians, or the Native Americans, as they call them now. Yeah, a huge amount of wrong. I mean, for some figures I've read, 100 million Red Indians or Native Americans were slaughtered, you know, by the British. And now, of course, you know, you've got the United States, and the Red Indians were pushed onto reservations and stuff.
And you're speaking about the never again, but we see now like the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, you know, in China, 12 million of people persecuted and all kind of things. And China, between inverted commas, as a superior power in economics and everything, still denying the wrongdoing.
Once it accepts wrongdoing, then it has to correct it. And if it, you know, to them, look, The Chinese, they've got their own mentality. They've got their own superiority complex. The Chinese Communist Party has decided that that region, East Turkestan, or Xinjiang, or however you pronounce it, which is a major part of today's China, and is part of the Belt and Road initiative project, and which has a huge amount of natural resources. They're not going to let go of it, and the people there, the Uyghurs, they want independence, and the Chinese are never going to give them independence. They've got far too much to lose. So when they saw that these Uyghurs are just not going to let go, and they want independence, they want to go back to what they were like in 1949. They came to a conclusion, right? We can't convince them to allow us to rule over them. So what we're going to do is we're going to forcibly change these Turkic Muslim Uyghurs into communist, atheist, Han Chinese. And that's the project. That's what they're doing. That's what re-education is all about. You go in as a Turkic Muslim, you come out as a atheist, communist, Han Chinese who worships Xi Jinping or whatever his name is. So, it's up to the, it's for the Muslim countries and the world as a whole, if they believe in human rights and all that stuff and humanity, to stand up and say, well, sorry, no, we're not going to accept that.
And as you spoke about governments and everything, but individuals, this boycotting and divestment sanctions, individually, they can actually hit the pocket of the...
Enormously, we can, absolutely. I mean, in fact, again, for the Palestinians, what can we do? And we can do the same thing to some extent, for the Uyghurs. But for the Palestinians, our governments are traitors. We know that. So we can't rely on our government to do anything. But if we go to Jerusalem in our millions, and we get the reward of 500 prayers in Masjid Aqsa, but we are also sending a powerful signal to the Zionist authorities: destroy the mosque, and you're going to pay a heavy price. This masjid and Al-Aqsa and Jerusalem doesn't just belong to the Palestinians. It doesn't just belong to the Arabs. It belongs to almost 2 billion Muslims of the world. That's the reality.
And
that's that we need to stand. And so far as the Uyghurs are concerned, what can we do? Yes, boycott. And we can boycott Zionist goods. We can boycott Chinese products. The problem is, and it's, well, especially Chinese products which are made in that region.
And I think because we just want to finish now, about Kashmir as well, the same strategy which is put in place in I think in Palestine by the Zionist occupation in China is as well done by the BJP in Kashmir, and do you think that the same thing is taking place in different way, and that we are seeing the same thing happening as well in Kashmir with the Muslims, about 200 or about 200, 300 million
Yes.
of them?
Look, India, especially under Modi, has become very, very close to Israel.
Yes.
Very close indeed. And they are openly saying now, Modi is saying, maybe we should be treating the Kashmiris like the Israelis are treating the Palestinians. we will use the same model. So same problems. The Israelis haven't exactly solved the problem of Palestinian resistance, and the Indian Modi is not going to solve the problem of Kashmiri resistance. They're just going to create a bigger problem for themselves.
And the COVID-19 has made it worse as well.
Of course, Kashmir has been on lockdown before the lockdowns of COVID. It was a complete lockdown, curfews and stuff. And of course,
Right.
COVID has made it even worse. So again, it's a case of Muslim government standing up to India, boycotting, whatever. Hit them in the pocket. That's where it really hurts.
I think next on the 11th, 12th of June, the G7 will be meeting in Cornwall. And do you expect anything to come out of it, or just?
They will be looking at what's in their best interest. So it's nothing good is going to come out of it for us. How can they become richer? How can they make sure their populations are more, the employment goes down, the money in their pockets goes up? I mean, this is, and this only this way will these governments stay in power. Otherwise, they'll be voted out. So it'll be all a case of how do we improve our economies so that we're not kicked out? Do they care about the rest of the world? So far as the rest of the world is concerned, the West and these G7 will only have one main thing in their minds: to allow them to develop just about enough so they have enough money in their pockets to buy our products. That's it. They have enough money in their pockets to buy our products as we export them to their countries.
Right.
They're not interested in anything else. So yes, they will try to bring about some degree of prosperity in other countries, Muslim countries, Africa, etc., South America, but only enough so that we are a viable market for their exports.
Okay. All right. I think we've come to the end of our program. We thank Brother Asad Zaman for his in-depth, I think, especially on the first part about this, and I hope, inshallah, you benefit from it as well. If you have any comments or questions as well for our guest for next week, inshallah, program, you can just send them to admin at Radio Hajj online, and therefore you can just send us there. I think it's on here there, and I think admin at Radio Hajj online. And until we see you again, I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us, inshallah, and bring peace and security to everywhere, inshallah. And of course, look after yourself as well and your family as well. Until we meet again, we say subhanakallah wa bihamdik, nashhadu la astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.